So one of the things I can't stand about our DIY home is our bedroom, because it's so boring and it needs so much more finishing touches, and it never had a headboard since forever. So today I'm going to show you how I converted some pallet wood into a DIY headboard for £10.30, and all this wood, apart from the trim, came from our Buildland deliveries recently. So keep on watching. So I had about 3 pallets here, and after completely ripping them apart and using my miter saw, I just gave every end strip a mitered edge. Then I needed to think about the backing of my headboard, and I absolutely would have preferred to buy a whole sheet of plywood, but I've got so much wood in my shed, so I decided it was a better idea to get rid of an old IKEA billy bookcase, and if I cut it in strips and buttered them together, it would work, and nobody would be able to see it. So I cut these into 5 strips, which would make my headboard 70 centimetres deep, and about 140 centimetres wide for a king-size bed. It's a good idea to measure your bed and get a feel for what you want. So using some offcuts of the billy bookcase, I just laid those on top of a table for protection, on top of a rag, and laid out my strips. Then I made a line that was dead centre through all the panels, and then temporarily screwed a long piece of straight wood dead centre where I'd put that pencil mark in, and that was going to keep my chevrons straight. And because I had 3 different types of pallets, I separated them into piles because I wanted to try and match them as best I could later on. And they were all different thicknesses, and I didn't have a table saw or a thicknesser to make sure they were all exactly the same. So I lined my first piece up and then used this very strong wood glue that my dad gave me. I'm pretty sure I used too much here, but I just got a bit lazy and the spout was all clogged up. So once I'd glued that, I pressed it down, and I attached each piece the old-fashioned way with the good old hammer and nails, which takes me back to some fun days at my dad's woodyard. And because I had different thicknesses of pallet, for the thinner wood I had to use 30mm panel nails and 40mm for the thicker pieces. But if you've got a nail gun, I'm sure you'd fly straight through this. Then once I finished one side, I'd left it to dry overnight, and I tried flipping it over just so I could accurately cut the excess off, and it was just far too heavy, so I had to improvise a bit. That is one heavy bitch. So I made a straight line on the top, which I knew was an inch away from the backing, because I didn't want to do any mistakes. And I went over that line with a jigsaw again, and this is when it started to look so much better. Oh, much better. And then it was much lighter to flip over. Then I knew I could accurately cut the excess off and make it flush with the backboard. So once I'd tidied that up, I unscrewed that middle strip off. I need to pry this because the glue has seeped into it, and I'm impressed with the strength of this glue. And then it was time to repeat that method on the other side to create some really stylish chevrons. But just before I did that, I started laying them out a bit, and I realised that maybe I must have cut my 45-degree angles not quite perfect, or there were too many flaws in the wood, because they didn't all match by the time I got to the bottom. And that also meant there were some gaps in the centre. So I decided to paint a black line in the middle just to create a shadow effect so you couldn't see straight through to the white back. And once that was dry, you know the score, I did exactly the same as I did on the other side until it was completely covered. And then once I'd done that, I cut the excess off with a jigsaw again. So now we're on to making the pallet all smooth, and I decided to take this outside and lay it on my decking and go over the whole thing with a belt sander, and that way the dust wouldn't go all over the house. I didn't spend a long time on this, I just wanted to make sure there were no risk of splinters and that it was smooth, but I wasn't that bothered about the pallets being different thicknesses. However, on some protruding parts I did get a bit old-fashioned, and I just chiselled any sharp edges off that were difficult to get with a sander. And then just went over the whole thing with my finishing hand sander. And then, because a jigsaw doesn't always give the best finish, I just planed all around the sides and then held something straight against it just to get a visual of how some trim would look next to it. So before I painted the piece, I completely hoovered every nook and cranny, and then I thought, you know what, I'm going to use my tester pots and give it a coastal, sort of eclectic feel. And I just painted each strip whatever I wanted, and no, I didn't prime it, and I didn't make my own chalk paint with this because I knew I was going to heavily distress the whole piece. And then once it was dry, I went over some of the strips lightly with a sanding block, and then dark waxed the odd strip for an aged look, and then heavily distressed some with a hand sander just to bring some of that wood texture back, and then sealed the whole piece with some rust-oleum finishing wax. Now, I was really worried about attaching this to a wall because most YouTube headboard tutorials don't actually show you that part. So I took some people's advice and went with a French cleat, and for this I just used some birch plywood offcuts and just cut those at 45-degree angles and screwed two evenly at the back of my board. And then marked them on my bedroom wall with the spirit level, and then drilled some holes, attached some raw plugs, then screwed the matching pieces to the wall, and then used an offcut of the same thickness at the back of the board to stop any wobbling. Oh my god, it's working. So to finish it off, this is the only thing that I bought, and it was some planed pine trim from B&Q, which cost a total of £10.30 for 2 pieces. I'll leave any links below, by the way, just in case you're stuck. And I just screwed that around the frame and locked them together. So hopefully you liked that tutorial, and if you do anything differently, then feel free to comment below, say what you do, and if you liked it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you in our next one. Thanks for watching. Bye. Say bye. Bye. No, you've got to look at the camera. What's that?